The clash of tankards and roar of victory songs filled the great timber hall, and Elara Whitclaw could still taste gunpowder and blood on her tongue when she sank her tusks into the shoulder of the human sergeant beside her. She felt the flesh give beneath her teeth, heard his sharp intake of breath, and then the hall fell silent around them. Heat flooded her face as she realized what she had done. The ale had loosened her inhibitions, the thrill of battle still singing in her veins, and now every eye in the feast hall was fixed on her. And the man whose shoulder bore the twin crescents of her tusks. Connor Kane stood frozen, his hand halfway to his cup, his hazel eyes wide with confusion. Blood seeped through the linen of his shirt where her tusks had broken skin. Not deep, but enough to mark, enough to mean everything. "Grandmother, I did not," Elara began, but the old orc woman was already rising from her seat at the far end of the table, her weathered face splitting into a grin that showed every one of her yellowed tusks. "A victory bite," Grandmother Marga's voice carried across the stunned silence. "And before witnesses. Oh, granddaughter, you have chosen well." Connor touched his shoulder, his fingers coming away red. He looked at Elara with an expression caught between alarm and curiosity. What just happened? Elara wanted the earth to swallow her whole. Around them, the other orcs of her clan were murmuring approval, nodding, some already raising their cups in toast. The humans at the feast looked bewildered, whispering among themselves. The alliance between their peoples was barely a month old, forged in desperation when the raiding warband from the northern wastes had swept down on both their settlements. They had fought together, bled together, and tonight they celebrated together. But clearly they did not yet understand each other. "Nothing," Elara managed, though her voice came out strangled. "It meant nothing. The excitement of battle, the ale, it means," Grandmother Marga said, arriving at their bench with surprising speed for a woman of 70 winters, "that you have declared your intent to bond with this man. The victory bite is sacred among our people. To bite during a feast of triumph is to say before all the world, 'This one is mine.'" Connor's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. He was a solidly built man in his middle 20s, with the scarred hands of someone who had worked hard all his life and the steady gaze of someone who did not panic easily. But right now, Elara could see panic flickering in those hazel eyes. "I assure you, honored grandmother," he said carefully, "I meant no disrespect to your granddaughter. We fought well together today, and you accept." Marga clapped her hands together, the sound like a thunderclap. "Excellent. The wedding should be held before the first snow. That gives us 6 weeks, plenty of time to prepare." "Grandmother, please." Elara stood, aware that her face must be the color of old brick. Her green skin always darkened when she blushed. "I was not thinking clearly. Sergeant Kane owes me nothing." Connor was still touching his shoulder, looking between Elara and her grandmother with the expression of a man who had just stepped into a snare trap. But to his credit, he did not flee. Instead, he took a slow breath and said, "Perhaps someone could explain what exactly a victory bite means." "Among my people, if someone bites you, it usually means they are very angry." That drew a few nervous laughs from the humans nearby, and Elara felt the tension in the hall ease slightly. She sank back onto the bench, wishing she could disappear. One of the clan elders, a grizzled orc named Tarak, stood and raised his cup. "The victory bite is an old tradition," he explained, his voice carrying easily. "When warriors return from battle, flushed with triumph, sometimes the heart speaks louder than the head. To bite another warrior in that moment is to claim them, to say, 'Your strength is mine, my strength is yours. Let us walk together from this day forward.' It is a declaration of bonding intent, and among our people it is binding." "Binding," Connor echoed. Not in law, Marga said quickly, though her eyes gleamed, but in honor. To offer a victory bite and have it accepted is a promise. To break such a promise is to bring shame on both families. I did not accept, Connor pointed out, his tone still careful. I did not even know what was happening. You did not pull away, Marga countered. You did not strike her. You did not reject her bite. That is acceptance enough. Elara covered her face with her hands. This was a nightmare. She had served in the militia alongside Connor Kane for barely 3 weeks. Yes, he was brave and competent. Yes, she had admired the way he had rallied the mixed human-orc forces when the raiders had nearly broken through their line. Yes, he had a kind smile that made something warm unfurl in her chest whenever he offered it to her. But she had never intended to declare anything, least of all in front of half the valley. "Grandmother, you cannot hold him to this," she said through her fingers. "It would not be fair." She felt the bench shift as Connor stood. For a moment she was certain he would make his excuses and leave, and she would spend the rest of her life living down this humiliation. But instead, his voice came gentle and surprisingly steady. "Honored grandmother," he said, "I respect your traditions. But I would ask for time to understand them better. I do not wish to dishonor your granddaughter, but neither do I wish to enter into something so serious without proper thought." Marga studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "You are wise for one so young. Very well. You have until the new moon to make your decision. 1 month. But know this, Connor Kane. My granddaughter does not give her heart lightly. If you refuse her, you will break something precious." "Grandmother," Elara wanted to sink through the floor, but Connor just inclined his head. "I understand. I will think carefully." He looked at Elara then, and his expression was softer than she expected. "No harm done," he said quietly. "We will talk when heads are clearer." Then he turned and made his way through the crowd toward the door, holding his shoulder. Several of his fellow militiamen followed him, shooting curious glances back at Elara. The feast resumed slowly, conversation starting up again, but Elara could feel the weight of every gaze. She rounded on her grandmother. "How could you?" she hissed in their own language. "You know I did not mean it. You know the ale and the battle fever." "I know," Marga interrupted, also in their tongue, "that you have spoken of little else but Connor Kane since you joined the militia. I know you watch him when you think no one notices. I know your heart, child, even when you do not." Elara opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. Was it true? She thought back over the past weeks. Connor had been patient with her when other humans had been wary. He had listened when she suggested tactics, had fought at her side without hesitation. He had shared his rations when supplies ran low, had made her laugh with his dry observations about their incompetent captain. She had looked forward to seeing him each day, had felt a strange lightness in his presence. But that was not love. That was simply camaraderie, friendship perhaps, wasn't it? "I have frightened him away," she said miserably. "He will refuse. And then everyone will know I offered what was not wanted." Marga patted her hand. "He did not look frightened to me. Surprised, yes. Confused, certainly, but not frightened. That one has steady nerves. Give him time." Elara did not share her grandmother's optimism, but there was nothing to be done now. The damage was done. She endured the rest of the feast in miserable silence, ignoring the congratulations of her clanmates and the curious stares of the humans. When she finally escaped to her small cottage on the edge of the village, she lay awake staring at the ceiling beams and cursing her own foolishness. Morning came too soon. Elara rose, fed her chickens, and tried to lose herself in ordinary tasks. She had 2 days before she was due back on militia duty, and she planned to spend them avoiding everyone. But late in the afternoon, a knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find Connor Kane standing on her threshold. his shoulder bandaged beneath a fresh shirt. He held his cap in his hands and looked uncertain in a way she had never seen him look on the battlefield. "May I come in?" he asked. Lara's heart hammered. She stepped back wordlessly, and he entered, ducking slightly under the low doorframe. Her cottage was small and plain, just a single room with a sleeping alcove, a table, and a hearth. He seemed to fill it with his presence. "I wanted to apologize," they both said at the same time, then stopped. Connor smiled slightly. "You first." "I am sorry," Elara said, the words tumbling out. "I did not mean to put you in such a position. My grandmother should never have that. The tradition is old-fashioned, and you should not be held to something you did not understand. I will speak to the elders. I will release you from any obligation. Your honor is intact." Connor listened patiently. When she finally ran out of words, he nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said, "but I am not here for a release." Elara blinked. "You are not?" "No." He turned his cap in his hands, a nervous gesture that was oddly endearing. "I am here because I realized I do not want one." "Not yet, anyway." Her heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Connor said carefully, "that your grandmother was right about one thing. We do not know each other well, but what I do know I like. You are brave and clever. You kept your head when the raiders broke through the eastern barricade. You are kind to the younger recruits, even when they make foolish mistakes. You have a good laugh, even though you do not laugh often enough." Elara felt heat rising in her cheeks again. "You noticed all that?" "I did." He met her eyes, and there was something warm in his gaze that made her breath catch. "I am not ready to wed someone I barely know, but I would like to know you better, if you are willing. You want to court me." The words came out more incredulous than she intended. "Is that permitted? Or does your tradition require an immediate answer?" Elara thought of her grandmother's triumphant expression, of the month's deadline Marga had imposed. A slow smile tugged at her lips. "My grandmother gave you a month to decide. I see no reason why we could not use that time to become better acquainted. Then we are agreed." Connor offered his hand, the human gesture of sealing a bargain. Elara took it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his grip. His hands were larger than hers, but not by much. He held her hand gently, as though she were something precious. "There is one thing you should know," she said. "If we do this, if we court, my grandmother will interpret it as encouragement. She will plan. She will scheme. She will be impossible." Connor's smile widened. "I have dealt with raiders and bandits. I think I can handle one determined grandmother." He had no idea what he was agreeing to, Elara thought, but she found herself smiling back anyway. They began slowly. Connor came by her cottage in the evenings after his work at the family farm was done. They would sit on her small porch and talk as the sun set. He told her about growing up on the frontier, about losing his father to fever when he was 15, and having to take over the farm while still learning to shave. About his younger sister who had married a cooper in the next valley. About his mother who still lived on the farmstead and whose opinion he valued above all others. Elara told him about her childhood in the orc settlement to the east, about learning to track and hunt from her father, before he was killed in a border skirmish with human soldiers 5 years ago. About her mother who had died bringing her into the world, leaving her to be raised by grandmother Marga. About the complicated grief of fighting alongside humans now, knowing that humans had killed her father, but knowing too that not all humans were responsible for the actions of a few. "Does it bother you?" Connor asked one evening. "Fighting beside my people?" Elara considered the question carefully. "At first, yes, but then I met you and the others. I saw that you were just people trying to protect your homes and families, same as us. The hatred started to feel hollow." Connor nodded. "My uncle was killed by orc raiders when I was a boy. For years I thought all orcs were monsters. When the call came to join forces, I almost refused." He looked at her sidelong. "I am glad I did not." "So am I," Elara admitted. True to Elara's warning, Grandmother Marga was a constant presence. She appeared at Elara's cottage at odd hours, always with some excuse. She needed to borrow a pot. She wanted to bring Elara some stew. She just happened to be passing by. And somehow, she always arrived when Connor was there. "How convenient to find you both here," Marga would say, her eyes twinkling. "Connor, you must try this fabric. I'm thinking of ceremonial wrappings, and I need to see how it drapes on a man of your build." "Grandmother, please," Elara would protest, but Marga was unstoppable. One evening, Connor surprised Elara by submitting to being measured, standing patiently while Marga wrapped lengths of cloth around his shoulders and waist, muttering to herself in the orc tongue. "You do not have to indulge her," Elara told him after Marga had finally left. "I do not mind," Connor said. "She loves you. She wants you to be happy. I can respect that." It was in small moments like that when Elara felt her heart tipping toward him. He was patient when he could have been irritated. He was kind when he could have been indifferent. He treated her grandmother with respect even when Marga was meddling outrageously. They returned to militia duty, and the other soldiers watched them with undisguised curiosity. The humans whispered among themselves. The orcs grinned and made ribald jokes that made Elara want to throttle them. But Connor took it all in stride, neither confirming nor denying the rumors, simply doing his duty and treating Elara exactly as he had before, with respect and quiet warmth. 2 weeks into their courtship, Connor invited her to his family's farm for supper. Elara's stomach churned with nerves as they walked the 2 miles from the village to the farmstead. It was a modest holding, but well kept, with fields of late-season wheat and a sturdy farmhouse that spoke of generations of care. Connor's mother, Margaret Kane, met them at the door. She was a handsome woman in her 50s, with silver threading through her brown hair and the same steady hazel eyes as her son. She looked Elara up and down with an assessing gaze that made Elara want to squirm, but then she smiled. "So you are the one," Margaret said. "Come in, come in. Supper is nearly ready." The meal was simple but good: roasted chicken, bread, turnips from the garden. Margaret asked Elara about her family, her skills, her plans. Elara answered honestly, aware she was being evaluated and determined not to be found wanting. "Can you keep a household?" Margaret asked bluntly. "Mother," Connor protested, but Elara shook her head. "It is a fair question. Yes, I can cook and clean and tend a garden. I can hunt and track. I can cure meat and tan leather. I can sew, though not finely. I am strongest with weapons and field work." Margaret nodded, seeming satisfied. "My son needs someone strong, not just in body but in spirit. The frontier is hard. Life here is not soft or easy." "I do not want soft or easy," Elara said. "I want a life that matters, a partner who respects me, a family if I am blessed. I want to build something lasting." Something flickered in Margaret's eyes, approval perhaps. She looked at Connor. "You have chosen well." "I have not chosen anything yet, Mother," Connor said, but his ears were red. "We are still getting to know each other." Of course," Margaret said, but she was smiling. Walking back to the village that night, Connor took Elara's hand. They had held hands before, but this felt different somehow, more deliberate. "My mother likes you," he said. "I am glad. I like her too. She is direct. I appreciate that." "She is like your grandmother in that way. Unstoppable." Elara laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet fields. "Heaven help us if they ever join forces." But of course they did. 3 days later, Elara arrived home from militia practice to find Grandmother Marga and Margaret Kane sitting at her table, drinking tea and talking like old friends. "There you are," Marga exclaimed. "Margaret and I have been discussing the ceremony." We thought a blending of traditions would be appropriate, some human customs, some orc. We have not agreed to marry, Elara said weakly. Not yet, Margaret said serenely, but it is wise to be prepared. A wedding cannot be arranged overnight. Elara looked between the two women, saw the determination in their eyes, and knew she was defeated. She sat down heavily. Does Connor know you are here? Not yet, Margaret admitted. But I am sure he will understand. A mother wants to see her son settled. The two grandmothers launched into a detailed discussion of guest lists and menu options. Elara stopped listening, her mind spinning. Was she really going to marry Connor Kane? The thought was less frightening than it had been 2 weeks ago. In fact, it was not frightening at all. It was appealing. More than appealing. When had that happened, she thought of Connor's steady presence at her side, his quiet humor. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened as though her words mattered. The way he had stood up for one of the orc recruits when a human soldier had made a cruel joke. The way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention, with something soft and wondering in his eyes. She thought of his hands, scarred and strong. His voice, low and reassuring. The breadth of his shoulders. The way he smelled like hay and wood smoke and something indefinably him. Oh no, she thought. Oh no, she had gone and fallen in love with him. The realization hit her like a bucket of cold water. Somewhere between the disastrous victory bite, and now, her heart had made its choice without consulting her head. She loved Connor Kane. She loved his decency and his strength and his terrible jokes that always made her laugh despite herself. She loved the way he treated her like an equal, never like something lesser or exotic or frightening. But did he feel the same? He had said he wanted to get to know her better. He had been kind and attentive. But that was not the same as love. Granddaughter, are you listening? Marga's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. What? I asked what color you prefer for the ceremonial cloth. Margaret suggests blue, but I thought green might suit you better. I do not care about cloth, Elara said, standing abruptly. Excuse me, I need air. She fled before either grandmother could protest, walking out into the gathering dusk. The village was quiet, most families inside for supper. She walked without direction, trying to sort her tangled feelings. She found herself at the edge of the practice yard where the militia trained. Connor was there, running through sword drills alone in the fading light. He moved with practiced efficiency, his blade catching the last rays of sun. He saw her and lowered his sword. Elara, is something wrong? Yes, she wanted to say. I am in love with you, and I do not know if you feel the same, and my grandmother and your mother are planning our wedding, and everything is happening too fast, and I am terrified. But what came out was, our grandmothers are conspiring. Connor laughed, sheathing his sword. I know. My mother stopped by the farm earlier. She and your grandmother are apparently best friends now, united in their mission to see us wed. Does it not bother you, the meddling? A little, he admitted. But I understand it. They want us to be happy. They see something between us and they want to nurture it. He paused, then added quietly, They are not wrong, are they? There is something here, Elara's breath caught. What do you mean? Connor closed the distance between them. In the twilight, his eyes were very dark. I mean that I look forward to seeing you every day. I mean that I think about you when we are apart. I mean that when I imagine my future, you are in it. He reached out, gently tucking a strand of her dark hair behind her pointed ear. I said I wanted time to get to know you. But the truth is, I already know the important things. You are brave and true. You make me laugh. You make me want to be better. And somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of this as obligation or duty or even just curiosity. I am courting you because I want to. Because I. He paused, swallowed. Because I am falling in love with you. Elara felt tears prick her eyes. You are. Yes. His thumb brushed her cheek. "If that is not what you want, tell me now. I will explain to the grandmothers. I will take the blame. But if there is any chance you might feel the same." She kissed him. It was impulsive and probably too forward, but she could not help herself. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, feeling him freeze in surprise before his arms came around her, pulling her close. He kissed her back with a tenderness that made her heart ache, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other spread warm across her back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Connor rested his forehead against hers. "I will take that as a yes," he said, a smile in his voice. "Yes," Elara whispered. "Yes to all of it. I love you too. I think I have for a while, but I was afraid to admit it." "Afraid of what?" She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "Afraid that you could not love someone like me, an orc, your people's enemy." "You are not my enemy," Connor said fiercely. "You never were. You are the woman I love. That is all that matters. Your friends may not see it that way. There will be talk. Let them talk." He kissed her forehead. "I do not care what they think. I care what you think, what you feel." "I feel," Elara said slowly, "like my grandmother was right all along, like that victory bite was not a mistake, like my heart knew before my head did." Connor grinned. "Should we tell them, put them out of their misery? Tell them what exactly? That we are going to marry? That they can stop scheming and start planning in earnest?" Elara laughed, the sound bright and joyous. "They are going to be insufferable. Undoubtedly." Connor took her hand. "But they will also be happy, and so will we." They walked back to the village hand in hand, and Elara felt like she was floating. The uncertainty of the past weeks had crystallized into something clear and precious. She was going to marry Connor Kane. She was going to build a life with him. The thought was no longer frightening. It was perfect. They found the grandmothers still at Elara's cottage, now joined by several aunts and Connor's sister, who had apparently ridden over from the next valley. The small cottage was crowded with women, all talking at once. When Elara and Connor entered, the conversation died. Every eye turned to them. Connor cleared his throat. "Mother, grandmother, Marga, everyone, we have news. You are getting married," Marga crowed before he could continue. "How did you?" Elara started, then shook her head. Of course her grandmother knew. Marga probably knew before Elara did. "Is it true?" Margaret asked, her expression carefully neutral but hope shining in her eyes. Connor looked at Elara and she nodded. Together they said, "Yes." The cottage erupted in celebration. The aunts embraced Elara, crying and laughing. Margaret hugged her son, then Elara, welcoming her to the family. Marga looked smug and delighted in equal measure. "I knew that bite meant something," she declared. "A grandmother always knows." Connor's sister, a cheerful woman named Sarah, pulled Elara aside. "I am glad," she said simply. "He has been lonely, though he would never admit it. You are good for him. I can see it in his eyes." "Thank you," Elara said, touched. "I will try to make him happy. Just love him. That is all he needs." The celebration stretched late into the night. Neighbors dropped by, having heard the news. The small cottage could not contain everyone, so people spilled out into the yard. Someone brought a fiddle, someone else a drum in the orc style. Music filled the air, and people danced, human and orc together, their earlier wariness of each other forgotten in the joy of the moment. Connor pulled Elara into the dance, and she went willingly, laughing as he spun her in circles. She was not graceful and he was no dancer, but it did not matter. They moved together, finding their own rhythm, and the world narrowed to just the two of them. "Happy?" he asked, his lips close to her ear. "Yes," she said simply. "You, more than I knew I could be." But the happiness was short-lived. 2 days later, news arrived that shattered the fragile peace. A human landowner named Thomas Garrett had laid claim to a stretch of pasture land that the orc clans had been using for generations. He had erected fences and posted guards, declaring that the land was his by old charter and that the orcs were trespassing. The orc elders had protested, showing their own documentation of traditional use rights. Garrett refused to budge. Tensions were rising fast. The militia was called to an emergency meeting. Captain Derrick, a gray-haired veteran, addressed the assembled soldiers with a grim expression. "This could unravel everything we have built," he said. "The alliance between our peoples is new and fragile. If this land dispute turns violent, it could spark a wider conflict. We cannot let that happen." "What are we supposed to do?" one of the human soldiers asked. Garrett has the law on his side. The old charters give him claim to disputed lands. The charters were written before the orc clans settled here, one of the orc soldiers countered. "Our claim is older, based on use and need." Arguments broke out. The room split along old lines, human on one side, orc on the other. Elara watched with a sinking heart as the unity they had forged in battle began to crack. Connor stood. His voice cut through the shouting. "Enough! Fighting among ourselves solves nothing. We need to approach this with clear heads. Both sides have legitimate grievances. We need to find a solution that respects both." "And how do you propose we do that?" Garrett's son, a young man named Robert who served in the militia, demanded. "My father has legal claim." "Your father has a piece of paper," an orc elder named Kara shot back. "We have generations of history." The argument resumed, louder than before. Captain Derrick tried to restore order, but the divide was too deep. The meeting ended in stalemate and anger. Walking home afterward, Elara was silent. Connor walked beside her, equally troubled. "This is bad," she said finally. "I know. If it turns violent, we will be on opposite sides, your people and mine." Connor stopped walking. He took her shoulders, turning her to face him. "No. We are on the same side, you and I. Whatever happens, we face it together. Your neighbors will call you a traitor if you side with orcs, and yours will say you have betrayed them if you support human law, but I do not care about their opinions. I care about doing what is right. And what is right is finding peace." Elara leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I am afraid. What if the alliance falls apart? What if we end up at war? Then we fight to prevent it. We show them there is another way." He tilted her chin up. "We are proof that human and orc can build something together. Our marriage can be a symbol of that." "Politics and marriage should not mix," Elara said, but she understood what he meant. "It is not politics. It is truth. We love each other despite our different backgrounds. If we can bridge that divide, so can others." Over the next week, the situation deteriorated. Garrett hired more guards. The orc clans held angry meetings. There were skirmishes at the disputed land, shoving matches that nearly turned into brawls. The militia was called out twice to keep the peace. Elara found herself caught in the middle. Her own people looked at her with suspicion because of her attachment to Connor. Some of the humans muttered that she was a spy, using Connor to undermine their interests. She heard the whispers and felt the weight of every stare. Connor faced similar treatment. His neighbors questioned his loyalty. Someone painted traitor on his barn in the night. His mother's friends stopped visiting. Through it all, the grandmothers remained steadfast. Marga publicly declared that the wedding would proceed as planned, a statement of defiance and hope. Margaret stood by her son, refusing to be swayed by gossip, but the strain was taking its toll. Elara barely slept, plagued by nightmares of war. Connor grew quiet and tense. Their courtship, which had been so joyful, now felt overshadowed by forces beyond their control. One evening, Elara arrived at Connor's farm to find him sitting on the porch steps, his head in his hands. She sat beside him, saying nothing, just offering her presence. "I do not know what to do," he said finally. I have tried talking to Garrett. He will not listen. I have tried talking to the orc elders. They are too angry to compromise. I feel helpless. You are not helpless. You are doing everything you can. It is not enough. People are going to die if this continues, and I cannot stop it. Elara took his hand. Then we stop trying to convince them separately. We show them together. What do you mean? An idea was forming, risky and probably foolish, but it was the only thing she could think of. We marry. Now. Publicly. We invite everyone, human and orc. We make it a celebration of unity. We force them to see that peace is possible. Connor looked at her. That is dangerous. If it goes wrong, if there is violence at our own wedding, then at least we tried. At least we showed them what we believe in. She squeezed his hand. I am tired of waiting. I am tired of being afraid. I want to marry you, Connor, not in 6 weeks, not when the situation is calmer, now, while it still matters. He was silent for a long moment, then he smiled, fierce and determined. All right, let us do it. They went to the grandmother's that night. Marga and Margaret listened to their plan, exchanging glances. It is risky, Margaret said. It is brave, Marga countered, and it might just work. Can you arrange it? Elara asked. A wedding in 3 days. The grandmothers looked at each other again, and matching grins spread across their faces. Child, Marga said, we have been planning this wedding for weeks. 3 days is plenty of time. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Invitations were sent to every household, human and orc. The village square was prepared. Food was donated from every family willing to contribute. The ceremony would blend traditions, presided over by both the human chaplain and an orc elder. Not everyone was supportive. Some humans refused to attend, calling it a disgrace. Some orcs declared it a betrayal. But more people responded positively than Elara had dared hope. Perhaps they were tired of the conflict. Perhaps they wanted to believe in something better. Perhaps they just wanted an excuse to celebrate. The night before the wedding, Elara could not sleep. She lay in her cottage, staring at the ceiling, her stomach a knot of nerves. What if no one came? What if violence erupted? What if she was making a terrible mistake? A soft knock at the door made her sit up. She opened it to find Connor standing there in the moonlight. I could not sleep, he admitted. Neither could I. They sat on her porch, shoulders touching, watching the stars. For a long time neither spoke. Then Connor said, Are you afraid, terrified? You? Same, but not of marrying you, never that, just of everything else. We will face it together, Elara said, echoing his earlier words. Together, he agreed. He left before dawn as propriety demanded. Elara spent the morning in a daze as the grandmothers and aunts descended on her cottage, bathing her, dressing her, braiding her hair with ribbons and small flowers. The dress they had made for her was beautiful, a blend of human and orc styles, with flowing skirts and intricate embroidery. She barely recognized herself in the small mirror they held up. She looked like someone's bride. She looked happy and terrified in equal measure. The grandmothers escorted her to the village square. A crowd had gathered, larger than she expected. Humans and orcs stood together, the divide still visible but less stark. At the front, beneath an arbor woven with autumn branches and late flowers, Connor waited. He wore his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, and when he saw her, his face lit up with such joy that Elara felt tears sting her eyes. She walked toward him, her grandmother on one side and Margaret on the other, both women beaming with pride. The chaplain and the orc elder stood together, united in purpose. The chaplain began the ceremony with a traditional human blessing. The orc elder followed with a ritual in the old tongue, calling on the ancestors to witness the bond. Then it was time for vows. Connor took Elara's hands, his grip warm and steady. I vow, he said, his voice carrying across the square, to stand by you in all things, to honor you, to protect you, to listen to you, to build a life with you based on respect and love, to be your partner, your friend, your family. From this day forward, you are my home." Elara's voice shook, but she spoke clearly. "I vow to stand with you through hardship and joy, to give you my strength and accept yours in return, to build something lasting with you, something that honors both our peoples. To love you without reservation from this day until my last." The elder brought forward a length of ceremonial cloth, woven in green and blue. He wrapped it around their joined hands, binding them together. "Two lives, one path," he intoned. "Two peoples, one future. What is joined today, let no one divide." The chaplain added his blessing. "May your marriage be a light in dark times. May you be an example of what is possible when fear gives way to love." Then it was done. They were married. Connor pulled her close and kissed her, and the crowd erupted in cheers, human and orc voices blending together. The feast that followed was raucous and joyful. Tables had been set up in the square, laden with food from both cultures. Music played, the fiddle and the drum finding harmony. People danced and laughed, and for a few hours the land dispute and the tensions were forgotten. Elara sat beside her new husband, her hand in his, and felt something like hope. They had done it. They had shown everyone what was possible. But in the back of her mind she wondered how long it would last. The answer came sooner than expected. In the middle of the feast, a rider galloped into the square, his horse lathered and breathing hard. It was one of the militia scouts. "Captain Derek," he shouted, "there has been an attack." Garrett's guards and a group of orcs clashed at the disputed land. 3 men wounded, 2 orcs injured. It is escalating fast. The joy drained from the square. People surged to their feet, angry voices rising. Elara felt her heart plummet. Connor stood, his hand still gripping hers. "Where is Captain Derek?" "Here," the captain called, pushing through the crowd. His face was grim. "This is what I feared. We need to get there before it turns into a full battle." "We will come with you," Connor said. "Connor, no," Margaret protested. "This is your wedding day." "Which is why we have to go," Elara said, standing beside her husband. "We cannot ask for unity and then hide when it is tested." Derek looked between them, then nodded. "Militia, assemble. Everyone else, stay here. Keep the peace." A group of soldiers, human and orc, rushed to gather weapons and horses. Elara changed quickly out of her wedding dress and into her fighting leathers, braids still woven with flowers. Connor armed himself with his sword and shield. Together, they rode with the militia toward the disputed land. They arrived to find chaos. Garrett's hired guards, a dozen men armed with cudgels and swords, faced off against twice that many orcs with axes and spears. Shouting and shoving had already turned into blows. A man lay bleeding on the ground. An orc woman clutched her arm where a sword had grazed her. "Stand down," Captain Derek roared. "All of you, stand down now." The fighters hesitated, then slowly backed away from each other. Garrett himself stood at the center of his guards, red-faced and furious. "These savages attacked my men." He shouted, "Your men attacked us." One of the orcs, a clan leader named Gorak, countered. "We were passing through land we have used for generations, and they tried to drive us off with violence. This is my land. I have the charter. We have tradition and need." The argument threatened to reignite the violence. Connor dismounted, Elara beside him. They walked forward together, putting themselves between the two groups. "Enough," Connor said. "This has to stop." "Get out of the way, boy," Garrett sneered. "This does not concern you." "It concerns all of us," Elara said. "Your conflict threatens the peace we all fought to build." "Peace with orcs is a fool's dream," Garrett spat. "They are animals." He stopped, seeing Elara clearly for the first time. "Wait. You are that orc girl, the one who married the Kane boy today." How fitting, a traitor to his race. Connor's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. I am a traitor to no one. I am trying to prevent bloodshed, something you seem determined to cause. I am protecting what is mine, at the cost of how many lives? Elara demanded. Is your pride worth starting a war? It is not pride, it is law. Gorak stepped forward. Your law was written to exclude us. It has no moral authority. It has the authority of the crown, Garrett retorted. The crown is 3 weeks' ride from here, Connor said. By the time word reaches the capital and a judgment is made, half of us could be dead. We need a solution now. What do you propose? Captain Derek asked. Connor looked at Elara. She could see the idea forming in his eyes, risky but potentially brilliant. She gave a tiny nod. Shared use, Connor said. The land remains legally Garrett's, but the orc clans are granted permanent grazing rights. Both parties agree to maintain the land together to share its resources. It is not perfect, but it gives both sides something. I will not share my land with orcs, Garrett said flatly. Then you are a fool, Connor said, anger finally creeping into his voice. You have legal right, yes, but the orcs have numbers and determination. If you push this to war, you may win the first battle, but you will lose in the end. And your children will inherit ashes. Is that what you want? Garrett hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face. Gorak spoke up. And what guarantee do we have that he will honor such an agreement? What stops him from breaking his word the moment we lower our guard? I do, Elara said. Connor and I will stand as guarantors. If either side breaks the agreement, they break faith with us, and we will not let that stand. You think your marriage means something? Garrett scoffed. It means we are willing to stake our honor on peace, Connor said. Can you say the same? The silence stretched. The two groups watched their leaders, waiting. Elara held her breath. Finally, Garrett let out a long sigh. Shared use. But I want it in writing, legal and binding. And I want assurance that my fences will not be torn down, my guards not harassed. Agreed, Gorak said slowly. If your guards stop threatening our people, and we want access guaranteed in perpetuity, not subject to your whims. I will draft the agreement, Captain Derek said quickly, before either side could reconsider. Both parties will sign before witnesses. It will be binding. Garrett and Gorak exchanged long looks, distrust and resentment clear on both their faces. But they nodded. For now, Garrett said grudgingly. For now, Gorak echoed. It was not perfect. It was not friendship, but it was a start. The militia escorted both groups away from the disputed land, ensuring no further violence erupted. The wounded were tended to. Slowly, the tension eased. By the time Elara and Connor returned to the village, night had fallen. The wedding feast had ended, but grandmother Marga and Margaret had waited up. Well, Marga demanded. What happened? Connor and Elara explained, recounting the confrontation and the tentative agreement. The grandmothers listened, their expressions shifting from worry to relief to pride. You did well, Margaret said quietly, both of you. It is not over, Elara cautioned. The agreement is fragile, it could still fall apart. But it is a foundation, Marga said, and foundations can be built upon. Connor rubbed his eyes, exhaustion clear in every line of his body. I am sorry. This was supposed to be our wedding day, and instead we did what needed to be done, Elara interrupted. Together, just as we vowed. He smiled at her, tired but genuine. Together. The grandmothers shooed them off, insisting they needed rest. Connor walked Elara to her cottage, but at the door she hesitated. This is still my cottage, she said. And you have the farm. We never discussed where we would actually live. Connor blinked, as though the practicality had not occurred to him. Suppose I assumed the farm. There is more room and my mother is there. But if you would prefer, the farm is fine, Elara said quickly. I just realized we have been so focused on the wedding and the crisis that we never planned the details of actually being married. Connor laughed, the sound weary but warm. We can figure it out as we go. For tonight, though, I am too tired to make any decisions. I can barely stand. Then go home. Rest. We will sort out the details tomorrow. He kissed her gently. Good night, wife. The words sent a thrill through her. Good night, husband. Over the following weeks, they settled into married life. Elara moved her few belongings to the Kane farm, a strange transition from her small cottage to the larger farmhouse. Margaret welcomed her warmly, giving her space to find her place in the household. It was not always easy. Elara was used to living alone, answering to no one. The rhythms of farm life were different from militia duty. She had to learn Connor's routines, his mother's preferences, the quirks of the animals and the land. But there were joys too. Waking beside Connor, his arm around her waist. Sharing meals with Margaret, who treated her like a daughter. Working side by side with Connor in the fields, their hands finding each other during breaks. The quiet satisfaction of building a life together. The agreement between Garrett and the orc clans held, though it was tested several times. There were disputes over boundaries, arguments over who had damaged a fence or driven off cattle. Each time, Connor and Elara intervened, mediating and reminding both sides of what was at stake. Slowly, grudgingly, people began to adapt. Humans and orcs started working together on the shared land, coordinating grazing schedules and maintenance. It was not friendship yet, but it was cooperation. A foundation, as Marga had said. Winter came, bringing snow and cold. The farm slowed, the fields resting under blankets of white. Elara and Connor spent long evenings by the fire, talking and planning. They discussed expanding the farm, perhaps adding goats or improving the irrigation. They talked about the future, cautiously hopeful. One night, as they lay in bed, Connor traced idle patterns on her arm. You regret it? He asked softly. The victory bite, everything that came after. Elara thought about it seriously. The chaos, the pressure, the conflict, but also the love, the partnership, the purpose. No, she said. It was impulsive and foolish, but it brought me to you. I cannot regret that. I am glad. He kissed her temple. I fell in love with you so fast. Sometimes I wonder if I am dreaming. If you are, I am dreaming too. Spring arrived, and with it new challenges. A sickness swept through the valley, striking human and orc alike. Connor fell ill, burning with fever. Elara nursed him, terrified that she would lose him just as she had found him. For 3 days he drifted in and out of consciousness. Margaret and Elara took turns sitting with him, bathing his forehead, coaxing him to drink. Elara prayed to gods she barely believed in, bargaining for his life. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Connor opened his eyes, weak but lucid. You stayed, he whispered. Of course I stayed, Elara said, tears streaming down her face. Where else would I be? He recovered slowly, his strength returning in increments. Elara barely left his side, fierce and protective. She realized how deeply her love had grown, how intertwined their lives had become. She could not imagine a future without him. Summer brought better news. Marga announced that another orc family was moving to the valley, drawn by stories of the successful human-orc cooperation. Then a human family arrived, seeking the same. The community was growing, slowly knitting together. There were still tensions, still prejudice and distrust. But there were also small victories. A human child and an orc child playing together. A joint harvest festival. Shared defense patrols. One evening, as Elara and Connor walked their fields, she felt a flutter of nervousness. There was something she needed to tell him, and she was not sure how he would react. Connor, she said, stopping by the old oak tree at the edge of the property. I have news. He turned to her, concerned. "What is it? Are you well?" "I am well. Very well, actually." She took a breath. "I am pregnant." Connor froze. For a moment she worried he was upset. Then a grin split his face, so wide and joyful that it made her laugh. "Pregnant? We are going to have a child." "Yes. In the spring, I think." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We are going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not cover it. I am everything." They told the grandmothers that night. Marga and Margaret reacted exactly as expected, with tears and hugs and immediate plans for the baby. They argued good-naturedly about names, about cradles, about 1,000 details that made Elara's head spin. But she was happy. Bone deep, profoundly happy. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Elara continued her work on the farm and with the militia for as long as she could, determined not to be treated as fragile. Connor fussed over her, earning both her exasperation and affection. Winter came again, and with it, the baby. The birth was long and difficult, but when Elara finally held her son in her arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. He was perfect. Tiny and squalling and perfect. His skin was a soft green, paler than hers. His ears were pointed, his features a blend of human and orc. He had Connor's eyes. "What should we name him?" Connor asked, his voice choked with emotion. Elara had thought about this. She wanted a name that honored both their heritages, something that would remind their son of what they had built. "Corbin," she said. "It means raven in the old tongue, a bridge between worlds." Connor smiled. "Corbin Kane, I like it." The grandmothers descended, cooing over their grandson. The village celebrated the birth, human and orc coming together to welcome the baby. He was a symbol, Elara realized, proof that their peoples could not just coexist, but create something new together. As the weeks passed and Corbin grew, Elara marveled at the life they had built. It was not the life she had imagined for herself. It was better. One evening, when Corbin was 3 months old, Connor carried him outside to see the sunset. Elara followed, watching husband and son silhouetted against the orange sky. "He is going to grow up in a different world than we did," Connor said softly. "A better one, I think." "Because of what we started," Elara agreed. "But we cannot stop. There is still work to do, still bridges to build." "We will do it, together." Elara leaned against him, their son between them, and looked out over the valley. The fields were green with early spring growth. Smoke rose from chimneys, human and orc homes standing side by side. It was not perfect. There were still problems to solve, prejudices to overcome. But it was home. The months turned into years. Corbin grew into a bright, curious boy who charmed everyone he met. The community continued to strengthen, human-orc cooperation becoming the norm rather than the exception. Garrett never became friendly, but he kept his word about the shared land. Gorak remained wary, but he acknowledged that the peace had brought prosperity. Connor and Elara became respected leaders in the valley. People came to them for advice, for mediation, for hope. They expanded the farm, built a larger house to accommodate their growing family when a daughter arrived 2 years after Corbin. A girl they named Petra, who had her father's stubborn chin and her mother's quick laugh. Grandmother Marga lived to see her great-grandchildren grow, her smugness about the victory bite never fading. Margaret doted on the children, teaching them to read and tend the garden. The 2 grandmothers remained thick as thieves, always scheming some new project. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Connor and Elara stood in the village square where they had been married. A monument had been erected there, a simple stone carved with the words, "Two peoples, one future." "You ever think about how it started?" Connor asked, his arm around her waist. "That impulsive bite," Elara laughed. "How could I forget? My grandmother will never let me live it down. I am glad you bit me, are you? Absolutely. Best thing that ever happened to me. He turned to face her. You know, I think I fell in love with you that very night. I was too confused to realize it at the time, but looking back, the moment your teeth broke my skin, something changed. Like my heart recognized you even before my mind did. Elara touched his shoulder where two small scars remained, faint but permanent. A mark of ownership, she teased. A mark of belonging, he corrected. I belong to you, you belong to me, we belong to each other. And to this valley, to this peace we built. That too. They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Around them, the village hummed with life. Children played, human and orc together. Neighbors called greetings across fences. Somewhere, someone laughed. It was not the ending Elara had expected when she had bitten Connor's shoulder in a moment of battle-drunk impulse. It was better. It was real and messy and beautiful. It was family and purpose and love. It was home. Connor pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder, right over those two small scars, the mark of where everything had begun. I love you, she said softly. I love you too, always. And in the growing dark, with stars beginning to appear overhead and the sounds of their community all around them, Elara believed in always. She believed in the future they were building, one day at a time. She believed in the power of love to bridge divides and heal old wounds. She believed in the impossible because she was living it. Years later, when Corbin was old enough to ask how his parents had met, Connor and Elara would tell him the story. About the battle, the victory feast, the impulsive bite that had started everything. About his great-grandmother Marga's immediate wedding plans, about the courtship that had turned real, about the land dispute that had threatened to tear everything apart. And you solved it, Corbin would ask, wide-eyed. We tried, Connor would say. We are still trying. Peace is not something you achieve once and forget. It is something you work at every day. Well, I have to work at it too. Elara would ruffle his hair, green like hers but fine like his father's. You already are just by being you. You are proof that human and orc can be one family. That is powerful. And Corbin would nod, serious beyond his years, understanding in his own way that he was part of something larger than himself. But that was still to come. For now, on this evening 5 years after an impulsive bite had changed everything, Elara and Connor simply held each other and watched the stars come out, grateful for every moment that had led them here. The victory bite had been a beginning. Their marriage had been a promise. Their life together was the fulfillment of both. And grandmother Marga, watching from her cottage window, smiled her knowing smile and thought about the grandchildren yet to come, the family still growing, the future still unfolding. She had known all along, of course. Grandmothers always did.